Hello and welcome everyone. We are here at the ILGA Europe office, and next to me is Anna Shepherd,
Hello.
fundraising manager at ILGA Europe. Will be your two hosts, and we'll introduce very shortly Alice and Chaber, who will be our two guest speakers today. Thank you for making time in your busy schedules to join us to discuss fundraising to grow and strengthen your community. We already had a first webinar yesterday where we defined that fundraising was more than about money, it was about relationships. And here we are going to explore this idea even further to detail how fundraising can help build your community, or community can help fundraise. That's the purpose of today's webinar. It will be recorded, so if you couldn't make it or if you have to leave halfway through, you'll find the link again in your email after the whole 3 webinars have taken place. That's early February. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna to ask you, Anna, how exactly does fundraising relate to community?
Well, fundraising and community building are really two sides of the same coin if fundraising is done well. So what we talk about when we talk about community fundraising is really raising money from and for the community. So mobilizing communities to support your cause through fundraising activities appropriate for them. It often has a regional, local focus, and it can take the form of community-oriented appeals, community-focused events, or voluntary fundraising. So members of the community doing their own initiatives to fundraise.
Apparently they can't hear us. I'm seeing a message from Apostolis Karaberis saying we can't hear. Okay, we can't hear you. All right. Okay, Anna is slightly low. Okay, you need to be closer to the mic. Okay, we'll just have to stay a little closer together. All right. Okay, you were saying.
Can you hear me now?
I'm getting a yes from Lisa Marie in the other room.
Fantastic.
So go ahead.
So yeah, we were talking about what is community fundraising. So something that has a regional, local focus. It can be a community-focused appeal, a community-focused event, or empowering your community to do fundraising on your behalf. So how exactly does fundraising strengthen your community? Well, doing fundraising requires communicating to your community clearly about what you do, how you spend their money, and being transparent, demonstrating your impact. And this creates trust between the community and your organization and your work. Getting community members and beneficiaries of your work involved in fundraising can be a very empowering experience, bringing them as part of your organization and part of your work. And it can be something very inclusive. Not everyone can get involved in litigation, or not everyone is politically active, but fundraising is something that almost anyone can get involved in with any kind of income level. So whether it's making a donation, organizing a bake sale in their own community, it's something that can be very inclusive. It can also fundraising can help meet a need in the community. So in yesterday's webinar, we had a very good example from Denmark, where older lesbians found there isn't really a space for them to meet. So fundraising parties met that need while also raising money. Just maybe before we turn to our speakers, a word of warning that community fundraising doesn't always have a big turn of investment, or can take time to grow, but it has a huge benefit. Like I said, empowering the community, promoting your organization and your work locally, making you less dependent on grants and international funding, And if your donors and fundraisers in your community have a good experience, they'll spread the word amongst their own networks and contacts. And they can be mobilized to take other action, like vote, take part in a campaign. And with long-term good relationships with your community members, you can
maybe you should speak to me, speak in my direction. Great, try that.
Grow them into major donors, regular donors, or corporate donors. So long-lasting relationships are a benefit of community fundraising.
Okay, so you're saying that community fundraising provides a basis for many other things, which is involving people, exactly, growing them into regular donors, growing regular donors into major donors.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We apologize for the quality of the sound. We'll try to fix this while the other speakers come on board. We are going to summarize, just so you know, the main points in a summary email that you will receive, okay? I'm now going to ask Alice Coffin from Lesbiennes d'Intérêt Général to turn on her camera and microphone. Okay, hi Alice, and I'm going to make you a little bigger. Great, that's you. Superb. How are you today, Alice?
Fine. Really happy to be talking to every one of you. Can first, is the sound okay? Because
the sound is okay, and I expect that people will say if it's not okay on the chat. I'll keep an eye on that.
Okay.
So Alice, thank you very much for joining us today. We've asked you to join because you were one of the 10 case studies. Your organization, Lesbiennes d'Intérêt Général, was one of the 10 case studies in the report. It shows that people care, exploring how LGBTI organizations raise funds from individuals in Europe and Central Asia. And Lesbiennes d'Intérêt Général is a very unique organization. Can you present it to us in just a few words?
Sure. So, Lesbiennes d'Intérêt Général, Lesbian General Interest, is dotation foundation created by 8 lesbian activists from France. I'm one of them. So I am also committed to many different lesbian groups in France. And I think the 8 of us, we are all still very much committed in lesbian activism. And that's why I find it so great to be able to speak here, because actually it's more like La Ligue is also a result of the lesbian community. We created this because we had stated that our community, the French lesbian community, lacked great deal of things, among which money and giving culture. So that's why we started La Ligue in spring 2016.
Okay, so La Ligue is just under 2 years old. For people who do not speak French, Lesbiennes d'Intérêt Général means general interest lesbians, and it spells LIG, which is also a wordplay on the League, which is, you know, the League of Lesbians. And so your model, Alice, is that you started out saying there's no money for lesbian projects and lesbian activism, so let's create our own fund. Correct?
Yeah, I would even say it's the history of La Ligue is really linked to the wounds of our lesbian French community, the way the lesbian community was hurt in France very much. Because if we say spring 2016, this was 4 years after the beginning of the same-sex marriage debate in France, which was also a debate about medically procurated insemination, and which was a big defeat for the lesbian community, because this law was never voted in France, with a very strong homophobic and lesbophobic movement. And what we had noticed is, wow, this community had no chance to fight back because it lacked so much financial structures, because the lesbian groups could not get funded by classical LGBTI foundations. They never got any money from that side. And also because our own community didn't have a giving culture such as you could find from some gay men or from some HIV activists who know very well how to do this. And this did not exist in the French lesbian community. So we say, in order to heal our wounds, in order to make sure we will never get hurt that much again, and in order to make sure our community take care better of itself, we need to create ourselves. We as activists need to create this foundation.
Okay, so you started really the DNA of La Ligue is the lesbian community itself, and so what you're doing there is you're starting an organization saying we're going to collect money from the lesbian community and disperse it, share it with lesbian projects, lesbian activists, and the lesbian community itself. So how did you start collecting money?
Okay, so the examples we have, so it's only 2 years, but basically, first thing would be to be on stage everywhere where a lesbian event take place in France. So those 2 years, we have been traveling, visiting, doing things. Every time a lesbian festival happened, every time there is a presentation in a bookshop or every lesbian event, we go on stage and we tell our people what is La Ligue, why we created this, and why we think they would benefit from this event. So this is direct reaching to the lesbians. Second way of doing is more personal. We go and visit all the major figures of the lesbian community, like the lesbians who have been doing so much for the community, and we ask them, what can we do for you to make sure we preserve your inheritance, because we want to make sure everything you've been doing for the community won't be left apart. And we often very much, whether we go on stage or whether we meet individual person, tell a very impactful story, which is the story of Le Testament de Rosa Bonheur. Rosa Bonheur was a famous French lesbian painter. And she had made a will to give everything to her wife, but obviously all her goods, all her paintings, everything went to her nephews and was lost for the lesbian community. Now it's been spread all over the world, and the community has lost some precious inheritance from Rosa Bonheur, and we want to make sure this never happens again for all the great other inheritances. So this is also a story of community. And maybe third and last way to process is so not large audience like in lesbian events, not major individual figures, but individuals who are any lesbian in France and who need to be given advice because they don't know anything basically about donations, money. And that's why it's so linked also to strengthen and empowering our community, because, you know, very often, sadly, women and the one we meet aren't confident enough to make sure they can decide for themselves what they're doing with their own money. And very often the issue of the conversation is not to know whether we will collect or not some money from them. It's making sure once we have discussed with them, they are empowered and they know what they can do with their goods, with their money, and decide for themselves. And I think this is a great achievement also for a community.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to summarize that. You do an ask on stage. You're on stage everywhere where there is a so-called lesbian stage or lesbian community. You make personal asks, and including legacy asks, so asking older people to put you on their will. And also, in addition to asking, very importantly, you give advice, so you also empower your community. So really, it's about both asking and giving. And how do you make sure that you empower your community? Before you answer, I'm going to turn to our viewers to say, if you want to ask a question, you can do so at any time in the chat on the right of the screen. If you're watching from YouTube, you can post a comment, and then our team will read the comment and will respond to your question. We'll ask your question to the speakers. So how do you empower your community at La Ligue?
So one thing is making sure, and we have discussed principles, making sure we don't do any damage and that we don't bring too much too quickly, because like I said, it's quite new in the French lesbian community to try to develop this lesbian philanthropy, to try to develop this giving culture. And we want to make sure, when I say damage, it's, for example, it would be terrible for us to take some money which was already going to our feminist friends or other lesbian organizations. But so what we do is really make sure of this, and every time ask ourselves, is this a good idea to accept a donation, and are we sure what we are doing with this? And secondly, the empowerment is because of the specific status of La Ligue, which is like a small foundation, so which enable donors to have tax decrease and things like this, which many other lesbian groups don't get. And what we want to do is also, we have many donations that we tell people, for example, a lot of them are asking to give to lesbian migrants, lesbian refugees in France. Well, for example, there is a group, an organization in France, which is called Lesbiennes dépassent les frontières, Lesbian Against Borders. But this group never got any money from any foundation or anything. And their status does not able them to receive such donation as we do. So what we do is we take the money, the way we do, but we give it back to Lesbiennes dépassent les frontières, to make sure we are not, stealing anything from anyone. We also, I was talking a lot about the people who give us some money, but I want also to talk about the project we support. And when we support project from our community, we always make sure we're not only giving money to them, but we are also once again helping them with legal advice, how they can be empowered. I'm going to give an example. We helped a radio show called Gouinement Lundi. This is Likely Monday, it would be the translation. And of course, we had some little donations about them being able to get some devices, a microphone, everything. But the most we did for them was help them get a status as an association, because they didn't know. Mm-hmm. So I think La Ligue and fundraising, it also means giving general structure, not only money, but getting your community to know how it can get organized and more powerful by reaching some legal status and really sharing our experience on this. And of course, it's very possible because we are activists, and we are still activists. So we know very well of the ground lesbian community and how it goes and who needs the advice.
That's really wonderful. So you're explaining that La Ligue is an activist fund. It's a fund, but it's an activist fund. It's steeped in very strong views of what you want to achieve, and also you lift up your community and the people you fund. So it's not only about redistributing money; it's also about sharing your skills and making sure that others can become stronger. Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, how does La Ligue decide? Okay, so you collect money through stage asks, personal asks, and legacy asks, and how do you decide who the money goes to?
Oh, also, well, we had this this committee, which is so we discuss every project, whether it's project which people have been applying directly on our website, fondslesbien.org, so they can have some direct request, but we also have some annual more grant plans. Like this year, we will be launching a special plan and special request for all projects dedicated to lesbian health. And I think this is also a kind of way of being also political as activists, because we chose this also because there will be in France, it has started in the following months, a debate on lesbian procreation, reproduction. So we want to make sure we also are linked to that the project are linked to the actual interest of the activists and the population. And then obviously we also decide from, like I said, the donors, the people who give, they can say for what they want to give more precisely, and then we have a lot of discussion because
sorry to interrupt on this last point, which was very interesting. You're saying that donors can specify what they want their money to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they can say, for example, many this year, and it's interesting, many wanted to give specifically to lesbian migrants. So we say, yeah, we will make sure this is where it's going to go, and other have other specificity. So yes, this is something we provide to the people we give, because, and you were so right, Anna, speaking about trust, and it was also about this. I mean, some people, especially when they are not used and everything, they want to make sure, like they want to know specifically, and it's been making a huge difference. This is really a request. I want to know what I be giving to more specifically than, and then hopefully we have also others that, you know, let us decide among our principles.
Okay, and let's get practical now. For the people listening to us today or watching this recording, what would be your advice if people wanted to fundraise from their community?
So I think the major thing is know your community by heart, like you know everything about what's going on, because then you spare yourself a lot of mistakes when you know very well how it's going down there, how people, like I'm going to take for example. I mean, the lesbian community, it has a special history with money. It has some special history with big structures, and which can be explained by because the community went through some specific kind of events of other. You have to take this into account to make sure you don't make you don't hurt people by the way you go and see them. And then I would say really make sure you make them the first to know. I'm going to give you an example. Obviously, the La Ligue is going to grow. It won't only be donors from the lesbian community, and this has also already begun, and some other people are helping us. But we wanted to make sure the community will be the first to hear about us. Like, I'm very much into media. I would love, and I'm really wanting to do a press release about La Ligue and saying this is what we do. But we said, no. First, we have to go everywhere in France and inform our own community that we are doing this. And even if we have the ability to go in the mainstream media and to reach further goals, we shouldn't skip the steps of letting our people know the first. They will be happy about this, and they will trust us for this. And now we are starting now to tell you, I'm going to write at last 2 years after this first press release, telling the mainstream, and we'll have our first big event in March. But I mean, this is 2 years. So we waited for 2 years to make sure all the major persons, groups of the community already know about this. And now we go wider. So I think it's important to make sure your community knows before the others.
Great, very good. So you took 2 years to make sure to inform your community directly throughout France. So you traveled to different events and different groups, and you really built that relationship, that personal relationship first before going public. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Alice, is there anything that you wanted to talk about so far that we haven't talked about? And we'll come back to you later with
I'll answer the questions and everything afterwards.
Okay, wonderful. Anna, does this elicit anything you would want to share with people? And apparently you need to speak to me more directly so that the microphone gets your voice.
No, I completely agree with the final points there. So it's all about the relationship, all about the communication, and the building the trust with the community to make sure they know why they are donating, what their money goes towards, what they have achieved with their donation or with their activity. And that's an incredibly empowering experience. It's all about communication and relationship building.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, and now we're going to bring Chaber. Chaber, can you turn your video and mic on, please?
Yes, hello.
Yes, hi, welcome.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, maybe just one or two more volume notches up, if that's possible. Or just speak a tiny little louder. Go ahead.
I think this should work.
This works perfectly. Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome, Chaber, and thank you so much for spending your time here with us as well today. Chaber, you're director at the Campaign Against Homophobia, which is Poland's #1 LGBTI organization, correct?
It's one of the oldest organizations, and yes, we're an LGBT advocacy organization. Have been doing the job for 17 years now. Yes.
17-year-old organization. Great, thank you. And you are also one of the case studies in the report. It shows that people care, and we explore in depth with you what fundraising really means. And the example of Campaign Against Homophobia comes back again and again when we ask people about successful LGBTI fundraising in Europe. So let me ask you, first of all, can you give us an overview of what your fundraising looks like?
Yes, a short overview. Let's see. We actually started a comprehensive plan on fundraising back in 2014. Before that, we did individual activities here and there, crowdfunding campaigns and things like that, but it was really not that planned and not that systematic. Around 2014, we started focusing on it because we knew that the institutional funders will go away at some point, and grants aren't a sustainable strategy to fund an organization, also because of the restrictiveness. And we started developing ideas on how to engage the people who are around us, who got something from us, who are in touch with us, into our daily work through donating money. Our strategies and plans changed throughout the last 4 years. Due to changing political climate and other things, and also the fact that we've been learning a lot. But I think at the beginning, the community or our supporters, our constituency were at the core of our fundraising efforts. And we tried to look for opportunities to involve these massive amounts of people who were around into our daily business, which was mostly advocacy at that point. So online petitions, letters to the parliament, to members of parliament or the speakers, trying to push or block legislative proposals and things like that. And we saw it as a mean of not only getting people involved, but also educating the community in a sense and building a stronger relationship with them. Based on that, we started, well, the usual, so asking people for money once they were engaged. And that proved to be really a very, very effective strategy, because we saw that with the engagement and with the trust, people's will to donate to KPH really increases.
Okay, that's a very important equation there. You're saying that more trust equals more donations.
Yes, definitely. We also saw that the people who have been engaged in several things and have been connected with us for a longer time were also much more likely to start a monthly donation instead of just, participating in a crowdfunding campaign or donating a small amount once.
So we learn from what you're saying now, and from the case study in the report, it shows that people care, that you cultivate donors. So you started by getting people to sign up and sign a petition and sign up for mailing lists. And then you looked at who was the most active there and started asking them for money. Can you tell us how that went?
I think throughout the years, we actually developed a larger scheme of action, which, as you say, we started from engaging people in petitions and things like that. And people who did the action, so who got engaged, signed the petition, sent a letter, sent an email, would get, within the next few days, would get an ask from us. We would track their activity and we would send them an email or something like that saying, thank you for getting engaged. This is what's happening. Can you please support our work? Donate now, and things like that. We tried to be very direct, which was very, very hard at the beginning. Just not to dance around the asking for money part. And once we saw people getting engaged on a more continuous basis, or signing 2-3 petitions or donating here or there, we started coming up with these donation schemes. So dividing our programmatic work into different areas of interest, so that people could choose a specific objective they want to donate to systematically, like every month or every quarter or something like that. And we started asking those people to do that, to just set an automatic money transfer from their account to ours. We also tried to track the size of donation and the donations and the frequency of them, to kind of see if we have any potential major donors in that pool. When we did, we tried to get in touch with them more personally, set up a meeting, have a phone call, things like that, to get them involved in on a more personal level, because we figured this is an investment that's worth making. Our fundraising plan or strategy is based on this kind of idea of a route or a path that a donor needs to take to trust us more and to get engaged more, and therefore be more likely to support the organization with more sizable amounts.
Okay, and so that donor path that you're talking about, how does it develop? Someone donates the first time, or they donate a couple of times, for example. How do you seek to turn them into a more regular donor, or how do you turn regular donors into bigger donors?
Well, you can't do that with everyone, obviously, because people have their own limitations. But the main point of how we do fundraising is that we try to integrate it in our everyday work and see space for donors or community members or other people who are our constituency in our activities. So whenever planning some kind of, for example, activities with schools or activities with parents of LGBT people, we try to integrate elements of fundraising into that. So plan a campaign around something, or last year we organized a benefit for a specific target group and things like that. So this integrational thinking really allows us to get people involved not only on emails, but also on in other areas, let's say, and gives us more opportunity to be in touch with them. We saw in the recent years that this strategy, this kind of method of mass emailing and asking people to sign petitions doesn't really work anymore, because this tool has become so popular that people are overwhelmed with this kind of method. So we're slowly just stopping doing that and kind of trying to shift towards major donors.
Okay. And so shifting towards major donor, does that mean that you're leaving behind slowly the mass emailing and cultivating mid-sized or small-sized donors?
We're just changing our methods. We will still remain in touch with our existing donors. We will still invite people to join, but we just won't use the mass mailing method. We will probably try some other ways of outreach, like direct talking to beneficiaries of our activities, like people who participate in our conferences, workshops, things like that. This might be more effective because always the face-to-face approach is more effective than an email, especially now that the email rates have gone down so badly.
And so you have now let's focus on your community of donors. You have a sizable community of donors. Can you share with us roughly how much it is?
I think last time we checked that at the end of 2017, we had something around 1,600 or 1,700 people who donated in 2017. So that's about that.
That's a very decent size. So 1,700 donors. Sorry,
those are the those are the people that we have contact details to. So there is a lot of donations that come anonymous, and we don't know who those people are.
Okay, so 1,700 named donors, plus many others. And how are you taking care of that community of donors? How do you talked earlier about maintaining contact, about creating a relationship. How do you do that concretely?
The biggest challenge is data management, because we really need to keep track of who allows us to use, for example, their correspondence address, who allows us to send emails or use their phone number. So that's the biggest kind of obstacle when it comes to management of donors. But we try to manage as well as we can with CRM systems. The basic kind of retention system is keeping people informed about what's happening with their donations. So approximately every 3 months, we send them an update. Usually it's by email. But once a year, we try to send a letter with a very, very small gift, something to remember us by, something they can use or put up in their flat to just keep us in mind, remember us, and feel involved and feel connected to the organization. We make sure that any communication we send is engaging in the way that it really shows people what their money is doing. It's not just a list of we did this, this, and that. We actually list the things that their donations leveraged and show their role in the life of the organization. We also try to create space for them to give input on other issues. So, for example, we consult our strategy with them. They were on the list of people we were consulting, we were doing the strategic analysis with. Also asking them about their opinion on other topics that are related to our activities. Because on one hand, that keeps them involved, and on the other hand, their opinions are really interesting because they don't have this strict NGO or civil society organization perspective. They're from the actual world out there.
Thank you. Before I continue, I want to remind viewers that we're coming near the question and answers time. So if you want to share your question, you can do so in the chat box on the right or in YouTube comments underneath the video. Now would be a good moment to do it so that we start getting your questions for the next section. And Chaber, you're saying you're really involving your donors in the life of your organization. You're not treating them as, oh, this is just fundraising, and then on the side there's still advocacy and there's still strategic planning, etc. I know you integrate your donors, your community of donors throughout. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that last part?
You really integrate your community of donors into everything your organization does.
Yes, we try to.
And so how would you do that? Do you organize events occasionally for donors to receive their views, for example?
No, not really. This is something we're looking into, especially when working with major donors. There's one event every year, which is our annual gala that donors get invited to, and many of them come. Obviously, not all of them, a small percentage really, but even the act of us inviting them to this event, right, which is a quite prestigious thing, really matters to them. We do get a lot of responses, and we do get a lot of direct communication, so emails and calls and things like that.
It sounds like a lot of work, and I don't want to give the wrong impression to people listening to you. How much time exactly is needed from you and other staff and volunteers to manage all this?
I actually think that the reason why fundraising is so well integrated in our other work is because we don't have a designated fundraising department or a designated fundraising officer. It's that we share the workload and we feel joint responsibility in seeking new people and keeping in touch with our donors. So at this point, there's, I'd say, 5 core people who work on the issue. The majority of the work is really done within, it takes, let's say, maybe a few hours a month or something like that, because it's really about updating, communicating, keeping informed. The major donors are a bit more complicated because they require more contact. So it's really hard to estimate at this point because it just became a part of everyday work. With some of them, the relationship is that we just actually text from time to time. With some of them, we meet once a month or once every 2 months. I think it can be done regardless of if you have staff or if you have volunteers. And I would really encourage people to try, do things with their own capacity, and just test what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, but the important lesson to remember from this is that doing fundraising and fundraising with and for your community is going to require some time involvement.
It will, but it's not that complicated. When we were starting, we really didn't have much time to do it. And our workload slowly increased gradually along with our capacity. So I think that's the thing. If you have little capacity, you try doing simpler things, smaller things from time to time and see how that works out.
Okay, great, thanks. And just like with Alice, trying to get a little more practical or as practical as possible, what would you tell viewers who are seeking to fundraise from or with their community? What practical advice would you give them?
I think the major advice I would give is something that I see when working with different organizations that are starting fundraising, and something I observed in KPH at the beginning as well, that you really have to push through the resistance of asking. People are afraid to ask and feel uncomfortable asking, but nothing bad really ever happens. And it's okay to ask people for money directly. And if you won't ask, you won't get an answer. Even if it's a negative answer, that's okay. And the second issue would be to plan your fundraising, regardless of your capacity and regardless of how many people you have. Having a good plan drafted for the next few months at least is always a good practice, because it makes you remember about things like thanking your donors, informing your donors, asking again.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Anna, and do stay on camera, Chaber. Anna, does
Yep.
does that mean anything to you? And do you want to insist on anything that Chaber said?
I would just like to say, maybe I really like the idea of this integration. So integrating fundraising into all of your work, it makes a lot of sense rather than keeping it as a kind of separate thing. So whatever you're doing in your work, if you're doing a Facebook post or sending out a newsletter about some part of your work that you've done, a litigation case or a campaign, just putting it in there, kind of, thanks to our donors, we did this, and would you like to get involved? I think it can really lower the threshold to ask and lower the threshold to give as well.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you. Thanks, Chaber. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover yet?
No, I think that's about it for now.
Okay, super. Now let me ask you. There is a question from Apostolis Karabaeris. There's a couple of questions in there actually. And Alice, you can come back on if you'd like, because I'll turn to you as well. The question is, what is the profile of the donors in terms of age, in terms of sexual orientation, being LGBT or allies? Average amounts that they give, how do they make donations? Is it via bank transfer, PayPal, or cash? So I think what Apostolis wants to know a little more about is, who are your donors?
Okay. Shall I start?
Sure, please go ahead.
The profile of our donors differ. There's no one clear profile, but I would say the majority are gay men and some allies, so families primarily of LGBT people. The average amount, I think, for last year, if you consider if you take out the major donors, would be around 10 euros, something like that, maybe a bit less. The donations are made either through an internet terminal on our webpage, so something that allows you to pay by card, credit card or debit card, or directly to our bank. We very rarely get donations in cash because we try not to operate on cash. And we rarely do fundraising events that would involve cash transactions simply. I think that answers. Oh, and the age.
Sure,
the age is anywhere from 23, 25 until 60, or maybe even above 60.
Okay, thank you. And coming to another question before jumping over to Alice, how many people are involved in fundraising in your organization?
Everyone does something in some capacity, but when it comes to contacting donors and donor retention, there's, I think, 5 people at this point working, communicating with individuals.
Okay, out of a total of how many?
No, 5.
No, but how many are you in total?
In total, 11 at this point.
Okay, 5 out of 11, so about half.
Yes, but other people apart from those 5 also organize events and run campaigns, fundraising campaigns. These are the 5
So
that
fundraising is not their only.
Yes.
Very good.
And no, fundraising is not their only responsibility. They have programmatic work as well.
Sure. Very good. Thanks. And Alice, what about the profile of donors at La Ligue? How old are they? What sort of profile? So obviously you explained lesbian women. How do they donate, etc.
It's funny about this because the president of La Ligue, Alix Béranger, who answered in the guys in the fundraising guide, she told me just a few months ago, oh, you know, for the first time, there's someone donated to La Ligue that I don't know. I didn't know at all about the name of this person who gave. So it means at the very beginning, those were either the profile were very much people very linked to the community, whereas they were very close to the 8 founding members of La Ligue, or whereas there were lesbian community who knew us because they are really in the community. But then it has spread. It's beginning to spread a little. Their profile would be the age is very different, because I think also the I guess the profile of the donors also reflect the profile of the people who are asking for the money. And for example, at La Ligue, some people are in their 30s and some others are in their 70s. So obviously, with all this 5 decades of difference, you won't reach at all the same people. And it really reflects that we have people donating with very, very, very different ages. About the average amount. So it's either, and how they give, it's either a monthly donation, which are rather small amounts, like 5 or 10 euros. And then when they give, it's between 20 and 50 euros. And of course, sometimes bigger donations. But obviously, the big thing will also be to get some bigger. Some of them have already been. We're working with them on donating houses, apartments, and everything. So some people have contacted us about this. We go not by PayPal, but because of a question of principle, by a thing called Hello Asso, but which is same principle as PayPal on the
it's a PayPal for French NGOs.
Yeah, exactly. PayPal for French NGOs. And then what was I was looking at the question? The people.
How many people are involved in fundraising in the Ligue?
So 8. There's 8 of us in the committee. And there will be 2 really taking care of making the individual meetings that I mentioned, because they're really good at it. Then we will, each of us would of course be part of the process, but it's rather, I could reverse the question, what would be the other tasks of fundraising? Because like Chaber said, I mean, everybody is involved in the fundraising, but what is left to do? And this would be, of course, communication, website, and making sure, which is very important, once we have fundraised, that we keep contact with these people. And how do we do this? So some people are also taking care of this, to organize things, to make sure that later we keep and inform about what we are doing. So that's it.
This is actually really important, because you're touching upon the pinnacle, really the central effort in keeping your community together. It's writing those letters, keeping in touch, etc. Can you detail very briefly what these people with that responsibility do?
Yeah, so what we do is, in terms of communication, we really try, but it's okay for us because we're talking about now, like, I don't know, 70% to keep in touch with. So as long as it's like this, we are getting them on the phone, because we think it's really important to say, hey, thank you, and every time. But it's still possible for us to do so. Then we very much go also on newsletter. And this is developing everything, making sure they know about what we are doing, how the projects are going. It's a lot about getting interview also with the project leaders that we funded. So because that's really part of also building the community. It's not only telling the donors, look what is done thanks to you, but it's also giving information, and information is power. So it's also gives back to the community. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. So unless there is one more coming in the next minute or so, I'm going to ask any parting thoughts, Alice. Any further advice on how to reach out to people's communities?
So I think maybe just a thought which is very important is to talk about time to people, about how this is not like just for tomorrow, but this is 50 years ago and 50 years long. I mean, this is, you can talk about a very different time schedule that they are used to. And I've seen this because in my own experience, like I explained to you, the members of La Ligue, they were implied in activism, where of course they were doing some collecting money, but more like crowdfunding. And even so, I could say we collected more by doing very crowdfunding events very quickly, and so we knew how to do this. But this is completely different. What we're aiming at in La Ligue, it's really telling and taking the time and saying, we have to be still there in some 30, 40, 50 years, and that's why. And it's important to tell that also to the donors, so that they know that this is not going, to disappear, and that they can trust us to have put on the good foundations to make sure this is going to last, and that also what's encouraged them, of course, to be in trust.
Very good. Thank you. So definitely build trust and keep those relationships based on trust. Thank you very much. And let me now turn to Chaber again. Chaber, before you share your parting thoughts with us, there's a question from Helder Ines. And Helder asks, do you usually work with companies as donors? Now, I know that it's not yet the case for La Ligue, but I know it's the case with the Campaign Against Homophobia. And how do you work in this area? How do you work with companies? Maybe you're still muted.
Sorry. We're just slowly starting corporate engagement or private sector engagement. It's not something we've thought through entirely, so there's not much to talk about there. It is primarily individuals at this point.
Okay, primarily individuals, that you're going into that direction. Yes. Anna, can I ask you if Helder, Ines, and others are interested in learning more about fundraising from companies? Would you recommend any resources?
Yes, we do have resources on ILGA Europe's website. So if you like to go onto our thematic fundraising page, you'll find some interesting podcasts and so on the topic. I think it's not maybe to go into too much detail about kind of corporate fundraising in this webinar, but it's of course useful to remember that members of the community work in the private sector as well. Yes. And that can be a very good channel to use those kind of empowered community members who are willing to support your organization, and to see if there is something they could do within their company. Their own company. Companies can often have initiatives like Charity of the Year, or they do,
matching
employees' donations, or they might have volunteering hours put into their working hours, which they could use for your organization. So there's a lot of things to explore.
Thank you very much. And I've now put up the thank you slide because Anna just mentioned ILGA Europe's very well-furnished fundraising resources. So the report, it shows that people care, which explains a lot about what Chaber does, what Alice and her team do, is available on ilgaeurope.org/fundraising resources. This is also where you will find the podcast, the other resources that Anna mentioned on individual fundraising, but also fundraising from companies. And all that together is going to be very useful to anyone seeking to fundraise from and with their community. And in addition to that, you can also get the insider's briefing of the report. It shows that people care. You won't find it online because it's a little more strategic. It contains a lot more advice on what to do, what not to do, how to start or improve your fundraising. And that you can obtain from Anna directly by writing to her at donate@ilgaeurope.org. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Alice. Thank you very much, Chaber. Thank you very much, Anna. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll be sharing the key thoughts by email as well as a recording in the next weeks. In the meantime, take care and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Nice weekend, everyone.
Bye, everyone.